6. The Ivan Vasilii. The Ivan Vasilii was a Russian vessel that was constructed in 1897 to be a cargo ship. It was powered by a steam engine that gave it a speed of around 8 knots, 9.2 miles per hour, which was fast for the time, and it was covered by sturdy iron plating to reinforce its wooden frame. It carried out its duties for 6 years until it was transformed to become a military supply ship in 1903, thanks to growing tensions between Japan and the Russian Empire. Ivan Vasilii was then tasked with transporting cargo to ships between Port Arthur, Manchuria, and Vladivostok. However, it was toward the last section of this journey that things started to go downhill for Ivan Vasilii. The ship had to travel more than 3,000 miles, 4,828 kilometers around the southern tip of Africa, and during a stop at Cape Town to replenish its coal supplies for the remainder of the journey, strange events began to occur. A mysterious presence seemed to make itself known to the crew, causing them to feel like they were being watched. They heard phantom footsteps and experienced sudden cold temperatures without explanation. Additionally, the crew began to worsen in mood, leading to arguments and fights breaking out among them for no apparent reason. It wasn't long before the crew's eyes began to play tricks on them and they started to see visions. A sailor, white as a sheet, ran into the captain's quarters to tell him that he'd spotted a ghostly figure on the deck that had walked toward one of the lifeboats before vanishing. The following night, one of the biggest fights on board broke out as it seemed like everyone had fallen into a fit of uncontrollable rage. As a result, one of the men even threw himself overboard to his death. The same thing happened the next night, ultimately ending another crew member's life. The strange thing was that after both events, the crew had no idea what had come over them. And rumors quickly began to circulate that there was some sort of malevolent presence on the ship. Eventually, Ivan Vasilii reached its destination of Vladivostok. Several men abandoned the ship after reaching the shore, but some of them couldn't wait for the vessel to reach the dock before jumping into the water and swimming to land. Unfortunately for the men that deserted, they were all rounded up again and forced back onto the ship under armed guard. They were then ordered to continue serving on the Ivan Vasilii, whose next destination would be Hong Kong. When the ship set sail, the fights and the jumping overboard continued. Just a few days out from their destination of Hong Kong, the captain, Sven Andrist, threw himself off the deck into the freezing waters below. Panic set in amongst the crew, and once they arrived at port in Hong Kong, every single one of them fled the ship, never to return. The Ivan Vasilii was left completely empty in its dock, leaving the Russian Navy no choice but to refill it with a brand new crew. This new crew was able to sail toward New South Wales, the ship's next destination, with no issue. That was until the ship pulled into Sydney Harbor and the captain, out of nowhere, took out his pistol and ended his own life. The rest of the men on board, after hearing stories about what had happened to the ship's old crew, refused to go any further. Ivan Vasilii then needed a third crew to man her decks. Although it was much trickier this time around, Ivan Vasilii was able to set sail for its next destination of San Francisco with a whole new crew. However, there was no reprieve from the strange happenings on board the ship. Before they'd even reached the midway point, 2 men were dead. Another 2 were confined to their quarters after being deemed insane, and the captain had shot himself in the head. By this point, the crew had had enough and diverted the ship's course back to Russia. This time, instead of finding a new crew, the Russian Navy appeared to listen to the fact that the Ivan Vasilii was indeed cursed, and sent the ship out to sea to be burned. In one final act of terror, those watching the burning and sinking of the ship reported hearing demonic wails and shrieks from the flaming vessel before it finally sank beneath the waves. 5. The Mary Celeste. On December 5th, 1872, the British vessel called De Gracia was sailing about 400 miles, 644 kilometers, east of the Azores Islands when the crew members saw something highly unusual. It turned out to be the Mary Celeste, a ship that had left New York City 8 days before the Dei Gratia and was supposed to have already arrived in Genoa, Italy. The captain of the Dei Gratia, David Morehouse, was surprised to see the Mary Celeste adrift and decided to offer help. Captain Morehouse then sent a boarding party to investigate the ship. But when they went below decks, they found the ship's charts scattered around and the crew's belongings still in their quarters. The ship's only lifeboat was missing, and one of its 2 pumps had been taken apart. There was also 3.5 feet, 1 meter of water in the ship's bottom, even though the cargo of 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol was mostly undamaged. All of the other supplies of food and water were still on board, and the fact that there was still a 6-month supply told them that the crew hadn't taken any provisions with them when they mysteriously abandoned the ship. There should have been 10 men on board, but the crew of the Dei Gratia was unable to find a single soul. The men searched through the records left on the Mary Celeste to see if they could piece together what had happened. The last entry in the ship's log was dated at 5 a.m. on November 25th, a full 10 days earlier, and even then, this didn't include any information to help solve the crew's disappearance. This sparked one of the greatest maritime mysteries in history, even inspiring a short story by Sherlock Holmes author Arthur Conan Doyle, and a movie in 1935 starring Bela Lugosi as a homicidal crew member on board the Mary Celeste. There have been many theories as to why the crew of the Mary Celeste abandoned her so close to the Azores, especially given that the vessel's captain, Benjamin Spooner Briggs, was traveling with his wife and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia. Some people have suggested that because of the water found in the hull and the disassembled pump, Spooner Briggs simply decided that as soon as they saw land, it would be safer to disembark on the lifeboat rather than continue on the Mary Celeste any longer. However, this seems unlikely due to the fact that the ship was still completely seaworthy and even went on to be used for another 12 years after this event. A seasoned captain such as Spooner Briggs would have known that the ship could easily have made it to the Azores for any necessary repairs to be made. Another theory is that some of the barrels of industrial alcohol that the ship was carrying began to emit gas. The fear of a sudden explosion or poisoning could have prompted the crew to make a quick getaway. The third idea that's been put forward is foul play from the crew of the Dei Gratia, who easily could have disposed of the crew of the Mary Celeste in order to gain payment for returning the abandoned ship, due to the salvagers' rights at the time. While it's not exactly understood what went on here, one thing is for sure: the Mary Celeste continues to fascinate historians and conspiracy theorists over 100 years later. 4. Kaz II. In April 2007, the catamaran named Kaz II was found abandoned off the coast of Australia. It was spotted 80 nautical miles, 148 kilometers out from Townsville in North Queensland by a Coast Guard helicopter before a boat was dispatched to its location. When the boat arrived, they found that there was no sign of the 3 men who'd been on board. Their clothes were neatly folded near the rear deck, the engine of the Kaz II was still running, and there was even a laptop that was still switched on in the cabin. So, what exactly happened to the crew of the Kaz II? The only clues that authorities had were their clothing, and that one of the sails had been slashed through. Otherwise, the vessel was still completely operational. There are many different theories being discussed about what could have happened to the 3 men. Some of the ideas include the possibility that they went for a swim and couldn't get back onto the boat, or that they accidentally pushed the vessel off a sandbank and it sailed away from them. Some people even think they left Australia illegally on another boat, or were the victims of a maritime crime. There are even those that have attributed the slashes in the vessel's sail to some sort of a sea monster. Even more curiously, Kaz II had been abandoned for at least 3 days before she was sighted by the Coast Guard helicopter, and had even passed by various fishing vessels without anyone suspecting a thing. Not only that, but a volunteer Coast Guard radio operator had apparently been in contact with the crew hours after they'd supposedly disappeared from the boat. What do you think happened to the crew on board Kaz II? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button while you're at it. 3. El Caleuche. El Caleuche is a legendary ghost ship that's said to sail the waters off the coast of Chile. According to folktales, the ship is crewed by the spirits of sailors who died at sea, and it's believed to be both a harbinger of death and a protector of seafarers. Legend has it that the El Caleuche only appears at night, glowing with an otherworldly light that illuminates the surrounding waters. The ship is said to be adorned with colorful flags and is supposedly filled with music and dancing, as its spectral crew celebrates their continued existence beyond death. According to some, the crew of the El Caleuche is also composed of warlocks who form agreements with traders. These warlocks promise prosperity to traders in exchange for dark deeds and favors. Due to this particular version of the legend, it's rumored that when a person from Chiloé suddenly becomes wealthy, they may have entered into a pact with a spectral crew of the El Caleuche. In addition, those who witness or hear the ship's call but resist it are said to be transformed into marine creatures like seals or sea lions. Despite its eerie reputation, El Caleuche is also said to be a guardian of seafarers, offering aid to sailors in distress and rescuing those who have been lost at sea. Some legends even suggest that the ship will offer passage to the afterlife to sailors who have died while out on the open water. However, in a twist of fate, those who see El Caleuche are said to be doomed to a watery grave. According to some myths, anyone who sees the ship will either die soon after or be taken aboard and forced to join the spectral crew. 2. The SS Valencia. Over a century ago, a passenger steamer named SS Valencia was met with a terrible fate off the coast of Vancouver Island. Today, you can still see the remains of the ship scattered across the beach and rocky shoreline. The SS Valencia was a small ship that had a history of transporting passengers, cargo, and troops. In 1906, during a particularly brutal storm, the ship hit a reef, tearing a large hole in the vessel's hull, and it then began to take on water. The captain ordered the ship to be beached, but it collided with rocks and was battered by high winds and crashing waves, leaving them unable to make it to safety. In the chaos that ensued, the lifeboats were launched, but most of them went wrong, leaving only 37 men to survive the disaster. Estimates of the death toll range from 117 to 181, but the final number released by the US government was 136, with every woman and child on board losing their lives. Today, the remains of the wreck can still be seen on the coastline, relatively untouched since the disaster, due to its remote location and the rough waters that surround it. This isn't the only thing left from the sinking of the SS Valencia, though. Over the years, many fishermen working in the area have reported sightings of ghost ships and lost lifeboats, manned by skeletons rowing through the water. 1. The Octavius. In 1761, the Octavius was docked in the port of London to load cargo destined for China. The ship left with a full crew, the captain, his wife, and his son. They successfully unloaded the cargo in China and then filled the vessel with goods for the return trip to Britain. The weather at that time of the year was unusually warm, and as a result, the captain decided to try and sail home via the Northwest Passage, something that no ship had ever done before at this point in time. Not surprisingly, the Octavius never made it back to London, and it was presumed lost. Fast forward 14 years later, in 1775, the whaling ship Herald was fishing off the coast of Greenland when they spotted a ship in the distance. As they neared the vessel, they could see it was in terrible condition, but still sailing, with the words Octavius written on its hull. The captain of the Herald ordered some of his crew to board and search the ship, but the men were in no way prepared for what awaited them. There was no sign of anyone on the deck, so they opened the hatch and made their way down to the crew's quarters. This was where they found all 28 of the ship's crew, all frozen to death. A similar sight awaited them in the captain's quarters, where his wife and son were curled up on the bed, frozen solid. As for the captain, he was sitting upright and frozen in place at his desk. The logbook for the ship was left open in front of him, and a pen was still gripped in his hand. Completely terrified by this point, the search party from the Herald snatched up the logbook and hightailed it off the ship to report to their captain. In their haste, the ship's log had been ripped, but the Herald's captain was able to deduce from the remaining pages what had happened to the Octavius. While attempting to cross the Northern Passage, the ship had become encased in ice about 250 miles, 402.3 kilometers, north of Barrow in Alaska. Melting ice had then freed the ship, allowing it to drift toward the location where the Herald had found it. The Herald deemed the Octavius as being cursed, and rather than rescuing the ship, they decided to leave it in the open waters. After that, the Octavius was never seen again. Which one of these haunted shipwrecks gave you the chills? Let us know in the comments down below. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.